G'day folks, I'm Daz and we've got Rob here as well. We're just going to run through scrutineering of the road race bike and road race gear of the rider, just to give you a bit of an insight into how you should go about it. Rob, if you want to show the guys how we'd start off.
A bit of a start off with a bit of a shake and feel of the steering and suspension and the rider controls. Paying attention to things like brakes and throttles, which often when the bike crashes can get damaged. The throttle housing here can get filled up with dirt or gravel or mud if the bike lands on this side, so it's important for all of these controls to be operational. 2 working brakes.
Yeah, with particular attention, as Rob was saying, with the throttle, that it always returns. If it's sluggish on return, it could get jammed open while it's out there. As Rob said, we need to have 2 working brakes, front and rear. So we'll give the wheel a spin, hit the brake, make sure it stops. And a lot of riders will come in if it doesn't work and they'll say, I don't use the rear brake, it's okay, don't worry about it. It is a requirement of the GCRs that you have 2 working brakes, and the reason for that is out the track, if the front brakes fail, the rider will need to use the rear brakes to help slow down. Now, even if the rider says he doesn't need, or he or she doesn't use them, they've got to have 2 working brakes, so we tick that off. The thing we've got to mention at the start of the video was that you should have your scrutineering checklist with you. Tick that off as you're going along. You can have a lot of bikes coming through and you're doing the same thing, and it's quite easy to forget a particular check on a bike, so the checklist is important to run through that. I'm going to run through the lock wiring.
Okay, lock wiring. There's a number of points on the bike that must be safety wired. The front brake calipers, just around the other side here, both sides, the brakes must be drilled and safety wired. Oil filter, this is quite simple. It's just an ordinary hose clamp with a piece of safety wire from the clamp to the engine case somewhere. That's perfectly acceptable. The engine drain plug. The sump plug should be wired. Anywhere fluid can escape, so the engine oil filler cap and the radiator cap, if you can get in there to have a look at the radiator cap. The other thing as well would be, just related a bit to safety wire, is engine case covers. The engine must have case savers or aftermarket covers or by the book GCRs to protect the engine cases in the event of a crash.
If we look at this particular bike on the other side for the engine cases, this particular one doesn't appear to have.
It should have a cover here.
So that would be a fail of scrutineering. So you tick off, and we'll keep going through the other items, but that bike would have to fail scrutineering because it doesn't have a right-hand side engine case protector, and it's for the point that if the bike was to fall down, that whichever of the cases, some bike have 2 cases, whichever the one's going to hit the ground first, that has to have a protection case so that if it was to grind, it doesn't put a hole in and drop fluid all over the track. So that's a fail for that one. Going around the bike, always give the wheel a bit of a shake or a feel, like to see if it's loose or anything like that. Exhaust, it's a good example there. That exhaust is loose, and that would also be a fail that's too loose.
Needs the clamp tightened up here.
That needs that clamp tightened up. The reason for that, right, was, it's not going to come off, but after a while of running around the track with the vibrations, that could potentially come off, hang off, and be quite dangerous. So it's important that something like that would be picked up. So again, as you notice, this bike doesn't have its belly pan on. It's a requirement that bikes are presented to scrutineering without their belly pan on. The reason for that is so that you can see all the lock wiring and the sump plug, which Rob showed earlier, being lock wired. So you need to see that, but they do need to bring their belly pan, because the belly pan, you need to sight it it could have holes in it. It needs to retain fluid, so you need to make sure it hasn't got any holes in it. The other thing you need to check for, it needs to have drain plugs. This particular one doesn't. And it should have two holes, one at the front and back, that can be filled in with a rubber grommet to seal it in the dry, but in the wet they need to come out. So this would also be a fail. So in this particular situation, we've got 3 things here that would be a fail. So you mark those on the checklist for this bike and this rider and your scrutineering card, and you'd ask the rider, say, go out of the scrutineering line, go back, fix those 3 items, then come back and represent it. Sometimes it's difficult. Some riders will try and question or argue. Just always go back to say, look, we've got a line of people, can you just go and rectify that and come back? So there are the items there. The other point Rob mentioned earlier about the radiator cap needs to be safety wide, which this one is. The other thing that we do sometimes is, as a requirement, there is no glycol or coolant to be in the water. It has to be plain water. To check that, we can get these strips and place it in the water, and if glycol is present, it will change colour, or coolant will change colour to indicate that. Now, a lot of bikes, in this particular case you can see here, it'd be very difficult to get that cap off in a quick manner, and if you've got a long line of scrutineering bikes, if it's something that's being targeted, it's a good idea to speak to the race secretary and have that information put in the final instructions and riders instructed to present with their radiator caps off. The other way you can do it is throughout the weekend is do general surveillance, going into the pit sheds and asking to remove the radiator cap and put it into the bikes. Obviously if coolant does leak and gets on the track, it's very slippery, so it's a really important check. You have to check the numbers. The requirement for the numbers are in the GCR, so each class or size of bike has different number colour and background colour, so they need to be correct. But the most important thing, there's also size requirements of the actual height and the width of the numbers in the GCRs and the type of font. But the most critical thing, because it can be hard knowing which bike, what size it is, whether it's got the right numbers, the most critical thing is how clear it is. It really needs to be a clear number so that the marshals out there can see the numbers on the bike. If one's fallen down, they can radio it in. So if someone presents with really small numbers are hard to read, that's when we need to look into the GCR so those numbers don't comply and ask them to fix them. Moving on to rider gear. It's a requirement of the GCRs that the rider presents with their gear on. The reason for that is that so that the rider, you can actually, when the rider's wearing the gear, you can actually see the leathers quite well. You can turn around, check for any holes in the leathers or any stitching coming apart, and you can also see the general fit of the leathers. You know, you don't want situations where a rider's leathers are really bad, and for scrutineering they just present with their mate's leathers that don't really fit them properly. And in this case, these leathers fit really, really well. So that you can see they fit well. You don't want them way too loose because they're not going to provide a lot of protection in a crash. With the boots, just check they're in good condition. You can see here there's a bit of tape there, but that's not to worry about. That's just to help the toe slider stay on. Those boots are a good nick. Again, looking for any holes. Same with the gloves. The point you're going to get holes in gloves to start off with around the sort of fingers around here. And the palms, just from when they're old and been quite worn. Give them a bit of a look at, just check that the general condition of them is okay. With our helmet, the big one here is looking for any previous marks. If there's any signs of it previously going down, that helmet is not acceptable and cannot pass scrutineering. So you need to have a look for any damage on the helmet. Also have a look if there's any big scratches on the visor or whatever. Rider might say it doesn't bother them, but if there's big scratches there, when it gets wet, it can cause a problem as well. And then obviously taking the serial number of the helmet down and recording that on the scrutineering sheet so that you've got that as a record of the, and obviously the biggest thing is the Australian standards number, so it needs to have that sticker on it. If it doesn't have that and still looks like a fine helmet, it cannot be scrutineered, can't pass. So there you go.
So when we're satisfied that the bike has passed the scrutineering test, it would have a sticker put on it for the benefit of the marshals, the start line marshal, to verify that it's safe to go out on circuit. If the bike's crashed, if it suffers any major damage over the course of the event, it would have to be re-scrutineered again.
The gear's good to go, mate. Bike needs a bit of attention.